All right, YouTube, Occult Literature number 42, Voice of Our Ancestors by Wulf Sorenson, which is almost certainly the pen name of Frithjof Fischer, not Heinrich Himmler. I'm going to have to explain specifically how this relates to the occult, as well as to sort of the Nazis and the Third Reich sort of movements. Link in the description where you can buy my edition of this work on Amazon. Second link to my books blog. A great many more pieces of material are available there. And the list grows every week, essentially, because some of these documents that get edited and released are frankly quite short. 25 to 30 pages long is pretty standard for some of the shorter philosophical and alchemical tracts, at least. Not so much for some of the more decent materials, but I've got a backlog of stuff, so I've got to get some of the shorter works out of the way first. Wulf Sorenson's work here should not be seen as a piece of Nazi literature. That's something that I think some people appear to have overlooked, looking at conversations that people have had about this piece of philosophical literature. It seems a lot of people think Himmler wrote it specifically from the Nazi perspective, and that's actually really not what it is. It's a sort of an earlier wave Volkish manuscript against the degeneration of society as a result of what was then in the interwar period going on, which is social alienation, much as we have it today. Number one. Number two, this text explicitly attacks Catholicism, which of course Hitler himself was a fervent Catholic. He was not a pagan. He was at least interested in dabbling in the occult to the degree of sort of pagan or Christian relics, like go after the Ark of the Covenant or the Spear of Longinus or something like that. Beyond that, he was more of a secularist, just a traditional Catholic of his time almost, which was, of course, tinged with eugenics, as it was here in the United States with both Catholics and Protestants. However, Heinrich Himmler and some of the other Nazi higher-ups did have occult paths. Himmler was quite clearly into dark magic of various forms. He fused it with science in some of the stuff that the Third Reich was doing. But it's interesting to note that materials like that of Fischer here were actually, in many cases, banned in the Third Reich. It was seen as deleterious to their movement. The idea was that most Germans were Christians, so a manuscript that said that Rome was the whore of Babylon and things of that nature wouldn't have been quite welcome. Where it overlaps with the occult is within its metaphoric content, really, as well as its applause for ancient paganism, German style, before the Romans came and began raping and pillaging and doing things like that. And that's really the core of the text. Fischer is, of course, or Sorenson, as he may call himself, is sort of talking about looking at portraits of his ancestors and how this one looks proud and forthright. He was probably a pagan. This one's kind of weak and anemic, and you can see them degenerating over time. It's almost like Lovecraft-style stuff, like the human race is degenerating away from some proud golden age of history. And he goes to great lengths to say when the monks and the priests and so forth came to civilize the people of the German lands were rightly incensed because they already knew that incest was wrong. They already knew that randomly murdering family members or friends was wrong. And so who were these idiots to come and tell them what right and wrong were when they were already practicing these laws? All they wanted was their money and their land and to control them and so forth, make them miserable. And we used to go fishing and hiking in the mountains, and we used to be brave and wear skins and go hunt bears. And now all of a sudden, everyone was like a fucking peasant and so forth. And he's not entirely wrong, by the way, on these accounts. Really, the Romans did screw up a lot of bordering civilizations that arguably had more nobility in them than the Romans by the time they conquered all these lands. No, Rome was already descending into decadence at the time. But it shouldn't be seen as a strictly even a racial manifesto. I think a lot of people assume that because it's Volkish, it's also racial. This text actually, I think like the Stormfront people would hate this text because it points out, there are people who look totally Aryan, but they don't act Aryan. They don't fit the cultural description of like a proud German or a proud Northern European or whatever. And then there are people who look ruddy and they have like dark features, and yet they're noble and they have more German blood in them. And actually, this is something I think that would confuse a lot of modern racial nationalists. I think the real problem is all the sort of degenerated skinheads who themselves were like Untermensch, according to the standards of the Third Reich. They're the ones now largely leading these movements, and all the sort of philosophical, the intelligentsia, that were the ones in charge early on in the first place. Now they've been totally forsaken. Everyone ignores them or calls them shills or whatever. But Sorenson's work dwells upon religious history. It dwells upon the concept of pagan spirituality. Again, things Hitler probably would not have appreciated. It attacks Catholicism, but says very little ultimately about Jews. It's really more of an anti-Romanist tract than it is anything else. Sort of, well, the Catholics ruined us in the first place, and now they're trying to ruin all of Europe, and they're especially trying to ruin us because they just want to break our spirit and do away with what's left of our national pride. This is almost 100 years ago that this was written. This is from the early 30s. So it's an interesting tract. It does overlap with the occult and the spiritual in the Volkish and sort of pagan sense. Not really like, oh, well, here's the spell that we'll use to destroy these horrible Romans. Here's the spell to raise a nation from the ashes. We will be, once again, we will be, Gothic warriors. Not sort of like that. But as a philosophical manuscript, it's at least as connected with the occult in the more modern sense as something on alchemy was from the Renaissance. So again, link in the description where you can purchase my edition of this work. Second link to my books blog where other materials as well are available. That's about all. Peace out.